Good morning. This is the Chorus Call conference operator. Welcome, and thank you for joining the Snam first quarter 2023 consolidated results conference call. As a reminder, all participants are in listen-only mode. After the presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. Should anyone need assistance during the conference call, they may signal an operator by pressing star and zero on their telephone. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Ms. Francesca Pezzoli, Head of Investor Relations. Please go ahead, madam.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Snam Q1 2023 consolidated results. Today's presentation will be hosted by Snam CEO, Stefano Venier, and by our CFO, Luca Passa. During the presentation, Stefano will provide you an overview of the results and the key highlights of the period. Luca will walk you through the financial performance, then back to Stefano for closing remarks, and finally, the Q&A session. Now let me hand over to Stefano.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, also on my side. I'm on slide 2 to start the presentation. Volatility continued in Q1. Gas demand declined by nearly 20%, while gas prices experienced some stabilization. 46% below previous year level, but still nearly 2 times pre-energy crisis level. Gas flows continue to be impacted by the geopolitical situation, and the volume decline from north was offset by a 35% increase of LNG import and lower demand. On the regulatory front, we had 2 new ARERA resolutions. The first, number 139, sets the criteria for gas transportation and metering services in the 6th regulatory period that goes from 24 to 27. More importantly, it confirms the 4 years duration, as well as the gearing and beta parameters. The second resolution was the number 163, that defines the general rules for the ROSS-based implementation, supporting a smooth transition. Details such as capitalization, efficiency, sharing rates will be defined after consulting period. We have just completed the submission to the regulator of the output-based incentives on the fully amortized assets based on the asset health methodology. We expect the full year contribution according to guidance, with reactive effect since January 1st. First quarter results were solid. Investment at 313 million were up 5% year-on-year, supported by the first floating vessel interconnections. EBITDA was up by 1.5% or 9 million euros year-on-year, notwithstanding positive non-recurring items of 33 million posted in Q1 2022. Net profit reached 301 million, down 7% year-on-year, affected by higher depreciation and amortization and higher cost of debt, while associate delivered stable contribution. Moreover, in April 2023, we closed more than 2 billion of sustainable financing, supporting our solid financial structure, as Luca will provide more details later on. On April 4th, along with the other core shareholders, we successfully placed 5.7% De Nora shares via an accelerated book building to increase the free float, supporting the potential share re-rating. The cash in from Snam reached approximately 145 million, and the capital gain about 76 million to be booked in Q2 2023. Moving now to slide 3. Beyond the financial performance, we have progressed in delivering along our key strategic milestones. We made some sound progress on key security of supply projects. First, we received the green light by ARERA on the Adriatic pipeline, which is also eligible for public financing. Second, the Golar Tundra started its commissioning on May 5th and will start operations by the end of May as planned. Moreover, all all the capacity was sold for the first 3 years and 86% for the remaining 17 years, confirming the strategic role of this infrastructure for the entire Italian system. Additionally, OLT capacity was fully booked via auction until 2027, and we have the 20% booked for until 2029. Finally, regarding storage, 1.5 BCM of reverse flow capacity was sold in Q1, contributing, along with gas demand decline, to keep storage levels at approximately 65%, well above last year. With respect now to energy transition, the South H2 corridor that is promoted by Snam, among others, was presented to the EU within the project of common interests. And a few days ago, the project got support letter by the Austrian, German, and Italian government that was sent to Europe. We further progress on third-party appraisal of H2 readiness of our network, with now more than 1,100 kilometers of pipes certified by RINA towards our 3,000-kilometer target set by 2026. Again, Modena H2 Valley, the development of a green hydrogen production hub jointly promoted by Snam and Hera, was awarded 19.5 million in funding that covers 100% of the investment as part of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. We were also awarded by 15 million euros for the realization of 8 hydrogen refueling stations. We participated in NORA, just started the realization of the Gigafactory nearby the city of Milan. Then moving to sustainability, CapEx aligned to taxonomy and SDGs represent respectively 30% and 46% of the total. We monitor the performance of our ESG scorecard KPIs on quarterly basis, and you can find it in the appendix of this presentation, and we are very well on track to reach the full year targets. We have done an extensive engagement with the key shareholders ahead of the AGM, which resulted in an average approval rate of 97% on all the items. And according to a recent analysis, ESG investors represent more than 40% of our institutional investors base, well above the sector and Italian average. Let's now move to slide 4 and take a European perspective. Europe and Italy are extending measures to promote security of supply, which remains a key priority, while policies to favor decarbonization and affordability are progressively being outlined and implemented. Let's talk about storage capacity. The storage filling obligation of at least 90% by the end of October this year was confirmed at European level, and emergency measures to voluntarily reduce gas demand of 15% at national level were further extended to March 24. Moreover, on April 25th, the EU Commission launched a process for European companies to register their gas purchases needs via the aggregate EU mechanism, a key milestone to refill EU gas storage facilities in coordinated and timely manner. The news that you find on the paper today is that 77 companies registered in this mechanism for a total demand of 11.6 BCM, as the Vice President Šefčovič declared. Under the current REPowerEU discussions, some of our key security of supply projects, such as the Adriatic Line, new LNG terminals, further reverse flow capacity, could be eligible to receive REPowerEU funds in the form of grants and concessional loans, thus reducing the overall cost for the system. While looking at affordability, as far as production is concerned, the recently announced EU Hydrogen Bank will support green hydrogen production and import, while biomethane in Italy already enjoys a favorable incentive scheme providing 15 years feed-in tariff coupled with grants. The RED II Delegated Act has outlined certification rules that are conducive of centralized green H2 production model. This is consistent with the results of a new H2 backbone study promoted by major European gas TSOs, which estimates in 330 billion cost savings over the period 2050 through a pan-European H2 network. Finally, the third angle, that is sustainability. The Net Zero Industry Act, launched in March, proposes a framework where green hydrogen, CCS, and biomethane are defined as strategic technologies for strengthening a competitive net zero ecosystem in Europe. A new European CCS strategy is expected before year-end. Both our CCS project in Ravenna and South H2 corridor could be then eligible for EU funds. We are following very closely final negotiation on decarbonized gas and hydrogen package, aimed at assuring that green gases will contribute to reach the EU energy and climate objectives. It's expected to be finalized before the year-end and will define the framework for hydrogen infrastructure and the role of gas TSOs in the future hydrogen system. Let's have a look now on the development of gas demand in the first quarter of 2023, and we are on page 5. So then, with regard to the gas market context, Italian full-year demand was down by 20% due to thermoelectric sector down by 22.7%, driven by gas to other fossil fuel switch. Electricity demand decreased by 0.7 BCM and raised in net electricity imports. That was the major contributor in this decline. Civil sector contracted sharply due to the milder temperature and to demand containment actions. The vast majority of the Q1 decline is not structural, as driven by mild winter, 1 BCM, and containment measures by 0.7 BCM. We had a significant decline in the industrial sector in line with what was observed in previous quarters. Preliminary data for April points to a mild decline versus last 5-year average, with signs of recovery in the industrial demand. Last year, gas demand proved to be quite resilient in the first half and started to decline severely in the second part, impacting year-on-year comparison. Moving to gas flows, they were impacted by the geopolitical scenario, with 48% decline in volumes from north, compensated by higher LNG volumes, plus 35%, and lower demand. At European level, in Q1, we had 15% increase in LNG imports, or 2 BCM, and we reached the record high daily deliveries of LNG in April, with US still the first exporter. Let's move now to gas storage facility on slide 6, which are strategic in the security of the supply and, let me say, also in the development of the prices in the forthcoming months. At the end of the thermal year, March 31st, 2023, the stock in the storage was approximately 5.4 BCM, that together with the strategic reserve corresponds to a filling level of approximately 60%, well above previous 5-year and last 5 years average, as you can see on the chart. In April, storage was filled up on a regular basis, with quantity injected in approximately 1.1 billion cubic meters and stock at the end of the month of approximately 6.5 billion cubic meters, which correspond, together with the strategic reserve, to a filling level of approximately 65% above the European average that hovers around 60%. We face next winter with a stronger and more resilient energy system, as we have gas storage facilities full above a historical level, and we are bringing on stream the first new floating vessel in Piombino in the next few days, which will provide further import flexibility. I now hand over to Luca to comment the financial results.
Thanks, Stefano, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, also on my side. Let's now move to the EBITDA evolution, and I'm slide number 7. For the first quarter 2023, we had 597 million of EBITDA, plus 1.5% versus last year. The increase is mainly attributable to a 20 million growth in the regulated revenues related to tariff RAB growth for 18 million, and higher contribution from flexibility services provided to the system for 12 million, mainly related to the default and storage services, partially counterbalanced by a negative volume effect due to a milder weather and demand containment measures. A 15 million increase in the energy transition business, mainly attributable to energy efficiency for 14 million, in particular residential business deep renovation. Biomethane new plants contributed for 2 million euro. As a reminder, first quarter 2022 benefited from the one-off contribution from the sale of gas excess inventory, with a 33 million EBITDA positive impact, and from the contribution of fees related to a telecom lease contract for about 4 million euros, which expired at the end of 2022. Moving to slide 8, adjusted net income for the period was 301 million euro, minus 7.4% compared to first quarter 2022, mainly due to higher D&A by 13 million euro following rising investments, net financial expenses that increased by 13 million, mainly as a result of higher gross cost of debt, which went from about 0.9% in first quarter 2022 to about 1.5% in first quarter 2023, due to the increase in interest rates. A lower contribution from associates for about 5 million euro, that was the result of the reduction of TAC, partially offset by DESFA, SEA Corridor, and Italian associates contribution. I will provide more details in the following slide. Our portfolio of international associates confirm a solid performance. I'm currently on the following slide. Starting from January, we benefited from the positive contribution of SEA Corridor, about 10 million, that entered into the perimeter on January 10th. TAP continued to work in full swing, even if, as known, the short-term volumes exceeding contracted capacity do not increase its contribution. The second step of its expansion, endorsed by the European Commission, is expected by year-end or beginning of next year. Interconnector contribution slightly declined year-on-year by 7 million. Operating performance remained strong, but profit cap mechanism kicked in, while last year benefited from the recovery of past year underperformance. DESFA contributed positive by 11 million, thanks to the higher revenues due to the increased LNG imports and export to Bulgaria. The negative contribution from the Austrian TAG, 23 million euro, is due to expire of long-term contracts, only partially offset by higher reverse flow bookings. Finally, Teréga, plus 4 million increase was due to the higher booking from Spain and lower energy cost. Turning now to our cash flow on slide number 10. Cash flow from operation for the period amounted to 224 million euro, including 261 million of cash absorption from the working capital evolution. This was driven by minus 480 million due to the balancing activity, of which about 270 million related to cash deposit decrease due to price reduction, and about minus 110 million related to default service receivable increase, minus 180 million of energy efficiency fiscal credits increase driven by Ecobonus revenues. The negative effects were partially counterbalanced by plus 290 million temporary effect attributable to additional charges, plus 100 million other regulated cash deposit related to storage following the start of the new thermal year. Net investment for the period amounts to 783 million euro and are mainly related to net CapEx and CapEx payables for 374 million euro, the cash out of the acquisition of the SEA Corridor for 409 million euro. Other outflows were related to the payment of the interim dividend for 376 million euro. Moving to slide 11, due to the previously commented cash flow evolution, the change in net debt amounted to about 950 million euro, resulting in 12.9 billion net debt at the end of first quarter 2023. Average cost of debt moved to 1.5%, and the fixed to floating ratio stands at 82%. Sustainable finance on committed financing was stable at 70%, not including the recent funding that was mentioned and closed in April. Considering such funding, it would have moved this ratio to 73%. Funding for the year is substantially completed. In April, we secured more than 2 billion of medium long-term ESG-linked financing, out of which 1.8 billion RCF obtained by a pool of banks and guaranteed by SACE. In April, our recent EU taxonomy aligned transition bond has been awarded as Transition Bond of the Year by Environmental Finance, as evidence of our continuous efforts in sustainable finance. Given the previously commented working capital evolution and the pre-funding already executed, financing needs for 2023 are almost covered, and we expect a net debt evolution in the range of 15 to 15.5 billion at the end of 2023, depending clearly on working capital volatility. Finally, in terms of financing costs, based on the current forward curve, we expect the average gross cost of debt to increase to just below 2%. And now, let me hand over to Stefano for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Luca. So then, we delivered, I think, a solid Q1 results in a volatile environment characterized by weak gas demand, gas prices declining, but above pre-crisis level and rising interest rates. First quarter is on track to achieve 2023 targets that we can then confirm, and that are in detail 2.1 billion euros of total investments that will be up 10% year-on-year, driven by the CapEx on our gas infrastructure and the acquisition of the second floating vessel, the BW Singapore, that will be located in Ravenna. 22.4 billion tariff RAB, that will be 5% up year-on-year. Net income of around 1.1 billion, and dividend per share up by 2.5% versus 2022, in line with our dividend policy. As was just said, net debt to fall within a range of 15.5 billion euros, assuming a partial reversal of regulatory working capital. We face 2023 with a much stronger and resilient energy system, and we have done sound progress on the delivery of key security of supply projects. Finally, EU and Italian policy support our long-term carbon neutrality path, and the REPowerEU funds redirection could support further key security of supply projects while improving affordability. We now are available for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the Chorus Call conference operator. We will now begin the question and answer session. Anyone who wishes to ask a question may press star and one on their touchtone telephone. To remove yourself from the question queue, please press star and two. Please pick up the receiver when asking questions. Anyone who has a question may press star and one at this time. We will pause for a moment as callers join the queue. The first question is from Javier Suarez of Mediobanca. Please go ahead.
Good morning, and many thanks for the presentation. Several questions. The first one is in the portfolio management by the company. We have read on the press potential several disposal processes in assets that are or should be close to Snam, such as Edison gas storage asset or the possibility of increasing the stake on the Rovigo LNG terminal, etc., etc. And at the same time, there have been recent decisions to rotate assets such as the stake on the Nora, and also you have made a modification in the shareholder agreement with CDP Reti on Italgas. So the question for you is, can you elaborate for us again on your preferred way of financing new acquisition, on which that could imply for your stake in companies such as the Nora, Italgas, or other stake that you have in your portfolio? That would be the first question. The second question is on the guidance confirmation. I wanted to ask if you are also confirming the recent guidance on the EBITDA at 2.4 billion euros, including output-based incentives at 100 million euros and a contribution from energy transition business at 70 million euros. If you can please confirm also that. And the third question is on just on your latest statement on debt guidance. I think that you have mentioned that includes a partial reabsorption of regulatory working capital in 2023. You can be specific on your assumption in regulatory working capital absorption that is behind the debt guidance of 15 to 15.5 billion euros by the year end. Thank you.
Okay. With respect to the opportunities on the M&A you were mentioning, of course, I like to confirm that the company is interested, of course, in understanding how the situation for Edison gas storage will evolve. As I stated several times, we are ready to set with Edison as soon as Edison will decide how to progress in this potential disposal. It works exactly the same for Adriatic LNG. As you know, we are shareholders in the company. We are following the process that the other two shareholders, ExxonMobil and QatarEnergy, just launched. And we have agreements with the two shareholders with respect on how and in what circumstances we might round our stake in that asset. Of course, consistently with what we said at the Capital Market Day, this kind of, let's say, acquisitions will be or can be funded in total or partly through asset rotation. With respect to the companies you mentioned, I think our valuation will be not limited to those. I would like to exclude again the fact that we will consider a disposal of the Italgas stake. Whilst in case these two transactions will successfully be concluded, we will see what is going to be the cash out, and we will measure the eventual options on asset rotation, also with respect to the total net financial positions that we want to maintain consistently with the threshold and references we have set and we have with the rating agencies. With respect to the guidance on EBITDA, we can confirm the 2.4, and then I'll turn to Luca for the working capital comments.
Yes, thanks, Stefano. On question number 2, Javier, basically we confirm the guidance on EBITDA at 2.4, which includes output-based incentives just north of 100 million for this year, for 2023, while we are assuming 100 million basically on average for the rest of the business plan. And the energy transition business will contribute around 70 million of EBITDA. So basically the numbers you were discussing before are fully confirmed. As far as the evolution of working capital, regular working capital, basically we expect for our assumption of guidance of 15 to 15.5 and of net debt at the end of the year, an absorption in terms of working capital in the region of basically just north of 2 billion, and that is based on the absorption that we mentioned in terms of regular working capital. In particular, balancing items will weigh up to a maximum of 800 million, tariff-related items in the region of 400 million, and other working capital items for about 300 million. Clearly, we will have an increase also in the absorption of working capital driven by our stock of energy efficiency eco-bonus credits, which will rise to about 700 million. And those are basically the main drivers. Clearly, in the net debt guidance, we also include the full payment of the dividend, which is just north of 900 million.
Many thanks.
The next question is from Emanuele Oggioni of Kepler. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for taking my question as well. First one is on South Issue Corridor. Recently, we read that the Italy, Germany, Austria, etc., signed a letter to put this project under European Union Common Interest project. So it seems that this could be brought forward by a few years compared with your original plan to invest in this project after 2030 for 4 billion only for the backbone project, and then also further billion for the storage capacity, 3 billion for the storage capacity. So I wonder how this additional capex or put forward capex could be financed, and how the could be the impact on how will change the outlook for the company. I think it has improved a lot recently in the last few months for the midterm. And then another question was on the disposal, more clarity on the asset to be disposed. So the Italgas, you mentioned Italgas is not in the short term among the disposals, but you put the stake among the asset to be sold. So can you recap the priority of your disposals? Thank you.
Thanks, Emanuele. I mean, regarding basically the first question, first of all, when we presented the plan in January, we have assumed that the 4 billion estimated expenditure for the South H2 corridor was partially before 2030 and partially after 2030. So basically, we estimated, the CapEx expenditure starting in the last 2 years of the decade, and the rest for the transport up until 2032. And those are, currently part of our long-term business plan, and potentially be financed with the cash generation that is within the business plan. I.e., the financing of this CapEx plan is sustained by the organic growth of the company. As far as the additional 3 billion for storage, those were originally planned, towards 2035. So, in the first 5 years of the next decade. And clearly, once we're gonna get there, we will see whether, any, additional financing measures will be needed in order to basically commit also those CapEx. But in terms of the acceleration of this investment, given the support of the three nations that you were mentioning, I mean, nothing has changed in that respect. I think the real news here is that there is a support from the three major countries involved in these projects that make these projects, let me say, more probable to happen, obviously depending on what will be the European policy around transport and storage for hydrogen. And then on the second question, you want to answer?
I can simply reconfirm the clustering we presented at the Capital Market Day. Those, if you remember, were all the associates were clustered in three groups. There was one that included those assets that within could be eligible in case of asset rotation to support M&A. And I can simply confirm that with the specification that with respect to Italgas, that is not a matter for the short term, the disposal of the stake. And we also said in several times that stake can be used or can be, let's say, can support some financing structures.
And let me just add that we don't have currently any asset disposal plan in our budgeting. So clearly, these are, let me say, our reasoning if asset rotation will be needed in order to support inorganic investment.
Okay, thank you.
The next question is from Stefano Gamberini of Equita. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for taking my 3 questions. The first, regarding the fact that the regulator defined the general criteria of the, we can say, a so-called simplified TOTEX from 2024. You underline that the other criteria will arrive in the second part of the year, but could you comment if you expect more benefits or risks from the introduction of this simplified TOTEX system from 2024 onwards, and probably we can say a full TOTEX approach from 26 or 28, we will see. The second question regarding the out-of-base incentives, you underline 100 million euros, north of 100 million euros in 2023, and more or less 100 million euros on the long run. Could you give us a breakdown of this TOTEX? What is the part related to the postponement of, we can say, of the fact that the assets will remain on stream for a longer period, and when the regulator will approve all this mechanism, if I understood correct your introduction. And the same for the 70 million euro of non-regulated business. What is the part of efficiency measure that are of these 70 million euros, and if you have a projection also for 24, it would be very welcome. The third is regarding the the trend of working capital next year. Do you expect a further absorption of working capital next year, or the level that you reach at the year-end will be more or less normalized also for the following years? Many thanks.
Okay. I'll start from, basically the more financial questions, Stefano. So out-of-base incentive, in terms of the breakdown, clearly we cannot give a full breakdown of the out-of-base, but on the asset health, the contribution should be in the range of 40 million to the overall number on a yearly basis. We submitted, basically our proposal to the regulator for this year, and we expect for this year basically their approval at the end of June, so basically in a couple of months. Then when it comes to the breakdown of efficiency or energy transition business to our EBITDA guidance of 2.4 billion for this year, as I said, is in the region of 70 million. The majority of the contribution comes from the energy efficiency businesses, while biomethane will contribute in the region of 10 million of the overall 70 million euro contribution. Finally, on the trend of working capital absorption, it's very difficult to say what will be the effect for next year, because a lot will depend on whether we will have any, let me say, delay in reabsorption this year, depending on prices in the last quarter of this year. So to be honest, while we are expecting, let me say, a reabsorption of the positive effect of last year, as I commented before on the different items, very difficult to say whether we will have, let me say, a negative effect next year, because it will depend on the prices in the fourth quarter of this year.
With respect to the TOTEX, what can I say is simply the fact that we share the principle of the let's say the new methodology that the authority intends to progressively introduced. Of course, we are still missing the details. I mean, the mechanism for the regulation of this slow money, fast money, and all the other aspects that relates to this approach. Therefore, what I can say, we don't see any threat or aspect that could jeopardize, let's say, the profitability of the company, and we are supportive, and we will still wait to understand how will be finally defined in the, let's say, details.
Many thanks. I have one question remaining, if I may. Regarding the South Central Hydrogen Corridor, what are the next steps that we can expect before the full approbation of this project by EU, and what is the financing or the incentives that you expect from EU for this kind of project, if I may? Many thanks.
It's pretty difficult to say. What I can tell you is that discussion at the European level with the, let's say, the people delegated by the Commission to define, firstly, if this project can be eligible and can be considered within the projects of common interest is ongoing. I mean, we have, let's say, I would say, a weekly exchange of information with the team delegated to provide further information about how we think this project should be set up, and also in, let's say, defining more precisely volumes and projections we expect. That is, let's say, the phase we are in. Then the following will be, of course, in the hands of the Europe that will set up the level of incentives. Definitely, as for all corridors about hydrogen, the portion of public support need to be significant especially on the capex side. Otherwise, let's say, the cost of this infrastructure will be significantly high. I can say that, generally speaking, the so-called CHEF funding support is generally 50%. Again, with respect to a comparison to other corridors, what I can say is that the percentage of repurposed pipes it's much higher in the case of the South H2 corridor, because it hovers around, we estimate it will hover around 70%, with only 30% of the pipes that need to be built brand new, and this number is much, much lower than the ones referred to the other southern corridor or the northern corridor. And of course, this has an implication on the total capex that, as we said, in the case of the South H2 corridor, is almost 1/3 of what it would be in case of total brand new construction. And on the other side, also has a favorable, let's say, impact on the transportation tariffs that becomes more competitive. But to be, let's say, straight to your point, I mean, we are just, let's say, in the middle of the process of the, let's say, discussion with the EU guys to understand the eligibility of this project for the projects of common interest and the eligibility on the CHEF financing. And also, as I said, with respect to the competition of other projects.
Many thanks.
For any further questions, please press star and 1 on your telephone. The next question is from Davide Candela of Intesa Sanpaolo. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for the presentation. I just have one, and I was wondering if you can share your view about gas demand in the medium term, so meaning, I would say, after 2025. And my question is, looking at the new vessels that are coming on stream, so the supply of Italy going up by about 10 BCM, do you expect further infrastructure that will be needed in the second part of this decade in Italy to further diversify the imports if the condition we have seen today remains as stable in future, or this new vessel will provide for the supply already diversified for the second part of the decade. Thank you.
With respect to the global gas demand in Italy and the rest of Europe, what I can say is that this year our projections, pose the total demand in line with the full year 2022. We have to say again that this total demand around 68 BCM is the consequence of some permanent efficiency gains, especially in the industry and in the domestic consumption, but this refers only to 20-25% of the total reduction in consumption from the historical 75 BCM. And the reason why is because the majority of the reduction in consumptions was driven by the mild winter we had either in Q4 2022 and Q1 2023, the switch off to other fuel. If you look at the prices at European level, and you look at the gas prices at 35-37 euro per megawatt hour, these prices are still higher than, for instance, the LPG or other oil derivatives. And therefore, for some of the industrial sectors, it's still more competitive to use those kind of fuels rather than gas. And also, with respect to the thermoelectric generation, we still have the full utilization of coal production. That is taking away more than 2 BCM demand from, the global demand. And I think the first objective for Italy and Europe is to get rid of coal. That is the most impacting in terms of emissions, and that is a demand that will be back for gas. Therefore, what we do expect is a slight recovery in the years between 25, 26, 27, moving back beyond 70, 71 BCM, and then seeing the effects of the decarbonization process with the electrification of the consumption and the development of the renewable generation that will bring back the global consumption of Italy in between 60 to 65 BCM by 2030. And that is, the best projection we can make, assuming that the targets in the renewable deployment will be met. Okay, with respect to the infrastructure, these kind of numbers are not different than the ones that were used to estimate the needs of infrastructure for the country, specifically with respect to the 2 floating vessels and the new Adriatic backbone. Of course, these numbers do not take into account the opportunities to export part of the gas in the central part of Europe, mainly those countries that are around Italy, like Austria, Bavaria, Hungary, and Slovakia, that are looking at Italy as one of the potential sources for their needs. In fact, last year we exported, as you remind, almost 5 BCM of gas that we expected will move, up, especially in the next decade. Will the 2 floating vessels be enough, or we will need a further capacity of LNG? Here comes also the strategic choices we intend to pursue. Of course, with the 10 BCM and this some spare capacity that has been added to OLT and Adriatic LNG, will bring the total capacity of LNG up to 40% of the total demand of the country. We might target the 50% to gain further flexibility. What I can say is that with the projection we make, the LNG capacity will be fulfilled for more than 70% up to the 2030, 2032, and then will hover at north of 50% with this capacity. And of course, that is a number that is in line with the historical average of utilization of the regas units, nothing different than that. So I think that at the end of the day, adding up to 5 BCM of LNG could be, let's say, another step forward to the further diversification of the sources and the strengthening of the role of Italy as a corridor also for the surrounding countries. Sorry if I made it too long.
No, that was clear, and thank you for that.
The next question is a follow-up from Emanuele Oggioni of Kepler. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up on Adriatic corridor. The project was recently approved by the Italian regulator, and as you said, it could be eligible for the EU funding. I recall that this project is included for roughly 1 billion, 0.9 billion in your current business plan out of 2.4 billion in total of investment. So I wonder how much of the CapEx could be self-financed and thus will enter in the RAB, and what will be the remaining part not eligible for the RAB due to the EU funding or grants. Thank you.
Thanks, Emanuele. I mean, it's very difficult to comment on how much funding could come from the REPowerEU around the Adriatic project. Correctly, you pointed out 900 million in this plan of a total capex disbursement of 2.4 billion estimated for the project, of which the majority again is beyond 2026, i.e. beyond the plan. Clearly, if we're going to get some funding, we might think of accelerating this investment a little bit in terms of timeline, therefore, potentially, allowing us to accelerate. And then in terms of the impact that this would have if we get, let me say, grants, REPowerEU grants around this investment, clearly the remuneration of the contribution of this investment is partial, i.e. we're going to get 10% amortized over 5 years, which is what is allowed by the European Commission when you get basically public funding for this kind of regulated investment. But that's for all kind of investment in regulated business when you get basically public funding.
Thank you, very clear.
The next question is from Bartek Kubicki of Societe Generale. Please go ahead.
Hello, good morning. Just two quick things. Firstly, in France, I think there is some discussion right now about the new regulatory period from 2024, which of course will impact your Teréga business. If you can actually share with us your expectations, whether it could have any material impact on the business or not, and what can we expect from the outcome, or what do you expect from the outcome? And secondly, on the strong contribution of DESFA. DESFA tends to be relatively volatile, but how much of this improvement do you think is structural, and how much is coming from this sort of seasonal volatility in the first quarter, and what do you think we can expect in terms of DESFA's contribution this year? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Bartek. I mean, regarding Teréga, basically, yes, there is a revision of the tariff, which suppose will affect the tariff starting from next year. The expectation for us is to basically go down just a little bit, basically shy of 60 basis points vis-à-vis the current basically remuneration. But again, the visibility on this change will happen towards the fourth quarter of this year. Clearly, we have an assumption of this reduction already embedded in our business plan that we presented in January. Then in terms of, the contribution of DESFA, I mean, DESFA, as already mentioned, had a positive contribution in the first quarter vis-à-vis our expectation. We expect this contribution to basically continue to perform towards the end of this year. But, going into next year, it's very difficult to say. For this year, we're talking about, 45 million in terms of contribution fully in 2023.
If I can add something to the point. I'm sorry. If I can add something to the point of DESFA, I mean, what is important also is the fact is in the perspective what is going to be the role of the interconnection with Bulgaria that significantly contributed to the flows. As you know, very soon, January 1st, January next year, we will have the new floating vessel of Alexandroupolis on stream that will provide further flows, partly directed toward Bulgaria. And also, third point that will stabilize going forward the perspectives and the profitability of the company relates to two aspects. First, the 10-year development plan that has been increased significantly under the request of strengthening of the infrastructure due to the new floating and new flows toward north, not only within the country. And that is this 10-year development plan will be significantly higher than the previous one. I wouldn't say double, but 50% more than the former one. And the second, we have the discussion ongoing with the Greek regulator also on the return for the regulated activities in the country. And again, as for Terga, we expect an outcome by the end of the years. And this outcome, of course, will come after the domestic elections that will take place in the forthcoming months. And again, differently from the situation in France, as far as Greece is concerned, we expect an uprise in the allowed return from transportation infrastructure, and that also will contribute on the stabilization and profitability of the company.
Thank you. Just a clarification, this new return will apply from 24 or retrospectively to 23 as well?
What we expect is a transitory period for 2023, and the new one applied from 2024.
Thank you, super.
Gentlemen, there are no more questions registered at this time.
Okay, then. Thank you. Thank you all for participating to this conference, and have a good day. Thank you.